Asyle, Tropical Island Survival. Day 1. Well, I guess this might as well happen. I should probably start with who I am and what's happened. My name is Gabriel Wolf. The date is somewhere around early January 2022. I don't remember the exact day. I was on a flight from Seattle to Taipei to visit the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. My personal experiments looking into new solid-state manufacturing methods finally caught someone's attention, apparently. I know there's a proverb that says, "A man's gift makes room for him, and brings him before great men." But my stomach was in knots the whole trip. I was still recovering from the Christmas rush. I hate travel. I hate flying. I've never even left the States. And here I was traveling halfway around the world to someplace where I couldn't even speak the language. I just knew the whole way that something was going to go horribly wrong. I just expected it to be something like not being able to communicate with the cab driver and failing to make it to the meeting on time, or having to sleep in the airport because something screwy happened with my hotel reservations. What I didn't expect was for the plane to crash. We were about halfway through the flight, and I was trying in vain to sleep, when the plane unexpectedly went into a nosedive and woke me up. I can only assume it was some kind of bug in the autopilot, and by the time the pilots got it back under control, it was too late. Again, I can only speculate that whatever the autopilot did damaged the plane's control surfaces, so the pilots could only try to make a controlled landing in the middle of the ocean. Cheapskate that I was, my seat was near the back of the plane, which probably helped save my life, as the rest of the plane and seats in front of me acted like a mild shock absorber, so at least the chairs didn't completely break my shins when we hit the water, and I was able to still walk to the rear exit of the plane. The life raft had already been automatically deployed and I was the first one in, but I think one of the engines was still running or trying to run in the water, so the additional shock of me jumping onto the raft must have torn it loose from the door. I tried to find a paddle in the darkness and confusion to help me get back to the plane so I could take on more survivors, but the current was too strong and the wind from the engine pretty much capsized the raft, so for the longest time it was all I could do just to hold on. Eventually, there was nothing I could do but conserve my strength, and I must have fallen unconscious. When the sun started to brighten the sky again, I came to, and saw what looked like land silhouetted against the horizon, so I paddled towards it. Now I'm on the shore, and I thought I should probably write, if for no other reason than to help calm my nerves. I need to take inventory. One of the pontoons on the raft popped when it came dislodged, so I had to kick off my heavy steel-toed boots just to keep from drowning. But like an idiot, I didn't let go of my backpack. It didn't make a difference, though. Aside from some pencils and this notebook, everything's ruined. My drawings, my laptop, everything I had stored on it, my inventions, my games, my stories, gone. All those little pieces of me, gone forever. I should never have gotten on that plane. I should have known that just when things were finally starting to look up for me. No, I can't go there. I have to survive if I want to have any chance of rebuilding even a little bit of my life. Starting over is always harder than starting up, but I'll always remember the important parts. I can rebuild them. I checked the raft. There's the oars, some cord, an anchor, a patch kit or something for the boat, a hand pump, a Swiss Army knife, something that looks like a shower cap that I can only assume is used as a bucket for bailing out the raft, some flares, a mirror, a flashlight with corroded batteries, a whistle, a bottle of stuff that just made a mess when I opened it, a compass, some fishing line and hooks, a first aid kit, a booklet with survival tips, some dehydrated food packages, and a couple of bottles of water. Enough to keep me alive for a few days at least. It looks like there's some kind of radio transmitter built into the raft, so I doubt I'll have to be here for too long until I'm rescued. Still, I need to do my due diligence and pull the raft up onto the beach and secure it somewhere easily visible, as it will be the first thing any rescue parties will see or come looking for, though that may take a few days. The next thing I know I need to establish is some sort of shelter. Propping the raft up on a rock or stick to make a lean-to is probably good enough for the first night, or day as the case may be. This island is clearly in the tropics, and I already hate the heat, so I should probably try to sleep during the heat of the day to avoid losing too much water to sweat, or burning myself in the sun. I can't just cool off by taking a dip in the sea constantly either, because the salt water is going to try and suck the fresh water out of my body via the law of diffusion. With temporary shelter and supplies sorted, I need to start working on something more permanent, because I have no idea when or if I'll be rescued. First and foremost, I need to get myself mobile. I can hardly walk properly across the sand in my bare feet, so the first thing I need to do is make myself some shoes. Okay, what kind of natural resources are available to me? There are lots of plants along the shore that I can cut with my tiny pocket knife, but I can't afford to break it like I did Dad's Swiss Army knife, which limits the plants I can cut up and the things I can do with it. Fortunately for me, I'm an engineer, so I can certainly design some simple shoes. I knew I was basically set for anything I might need to build when I saw a small grove of bamboo growing next to the beach. I managed to bend one over till it snapped, and then I broke it into sections over some rocks to the width of my feet, before weaving grasses around them to lash them together, making securing notches with my knife as needed. This allowed me to create a soft, flexible platform which I could attach straps to for my feet. Grasses also grow pretty much everywhere, so I found some and twisted them into fibers. I thank the documentary series Digging for the Truth for that little bushcraft skill. It occurs to me, though, that even if I couldn't find grasses, I might still be able to strip the bamboo into thin fibers or cords if I needed to. The survival book had instructions in it for various kinds of knots, so I used a slip knot to make the straps adjustable. I'm not going to be content with sandals, though. My feet are going to be coming in contact with everything on the ground, and will be the most likely things to get injured or infected, so now that I have my foot straps, I'm going to find and weave some tough, broad grasses around them to create a covering, probably double layered, so that my feet are never exposed. The grasses I found for the sandal covering have a sweet vanilla scent to them when cut. That's nice. I'll also stuff some dry grasses inside the shoes to keep my feet from rubbing on the straps and giving me blisters, as well as to provide a little padding and arch support. If I can, I'll also try to create reinforcement around my ankles as well to avoid twisting or hyperextending them. I cannot risk being injured for any amount of time. Besides, treating survival like an engineering problem helps me stay focused. With the shoes complete, I've decided I should also try to create a protective jacket or poncho out of the same broad grasses I used to cover the shoes with, to help keep the sun off me, because I can't afford to risk getting sunburnt. I may even reinforce my pants with woven grasses and sticks, because, like I said, I cannot risk even the slightest injury, and my legs are the most likely part of me to get injured, and without them, I can't find stuff to survive with. I'll also probably try to construct a hat. I think a conical one like those made by the Chinese would be easiest to make and could double as a shallow basket. And again, maybe I should just make a basket, because it's a little easier to make and I'll probably need something to carry supplies collected from the forest with anyway, when it's not on my head, that is. Making these protective garments took me most of the morning, hidden under my hot raft and occasionally washing off in the ocean when I couldn't stand it any longer, though this leaves my skin dry and itchy with salt crystals. I also used the broad grasses to weave a mattress for myself so I'll sleep more comfortably. Again, it seems like such a low priority in these conditions, but it really isn't, because I can't afford to be too tired to work, or for my judgment to become impaired by fatigue. In fact, I think I'll take a short nap now. I couldn't sleep for too long in the heat. Need to move on. With physical protection covered, pardon the pun, My next priority is to seek out a renewable source of fresh water immediately, especially since I'm sweating like crazy. When I was searching up and down the beach for the right grasses, I kept my eyes open for streams trickling down into the ocean. Now, I can extend my search envelope. It's afternoon now, and I found a small rivulet. It's not much, but it is fresh water, though I didn't do any more than taste it, just in case there were germs or parasites in it. I dragged my raft base nearer to it, hugging the forest as I went to stay out of the sunshine. I've been keeping my eyes open for signs of civilization here too, but I haven't seen any yet. Now that I have a source of water, I need to sterilize it, and that means I need to make a fire. Using some narrow bamboo, I fashioned a bow drill, having cut a little bit of raft cord for the bowstring. Though I could have used twisted grass rope, bamboo cord, or even cut and twisted a piece of my shirt, I decided it was important to make the string as strong as possible. I cut a little groove in the shaft of the bow drill to keep the cord from sliding up and down when I moved the bow back and forth. And to keep it from twisting out of place, I used a second length of cord twisted around it in the opposite direction of the first, so their respective torques perpendicular to the shaft would cancel out. I found a flat piece of bark and used a pocket knife to dig a little divot into it, just to help keep the drill centered. I'll use some dry grass or the like as tinder. Now it's just perseverance until I get an ember. That was easier than I thought it would be. Now I have a small fire, a ring of stones to keep it contained, and some driftwood to keep it fed. Next, I'll need some cooking vessels to boil my water in. While I have my plastic bottles from the life raft and even the rubber bucket, they would probably melt if I tried to use them as cooking vessels. This is the South Pacific, though, and there are a few coconut palms lining the beach and a handful on the sand that I've collected. They probably won't be plentiful enough to serve as a renewable long-term food and water supply, but I can use their husks as drinking and cooking vessels. They're much smaller in real life than they are in the cartoons. I'd estimate each is no more than 1 or 2 cups in volume, so I collected 16, since I'll need to drink 2 liters of pure water per day to stay healthy, probably more. I used my knife to remove the husks, and then used my bow drill with a little stone tied to the end of it to put a hole in the coconuts to remove the water for storage. I then did my best to split some of them in half along the grain, being careful not to damage my knife blade before scraping out the coconut meat. Coconut has never been one of my favorite flavors, but I figure I should do my best to stretch the dehydrated rations as long as possible. Toasting it on the fire makes it a little bit more palatable. I can now use my coconut halves as bowls and boil the fresh water from the stream in them, not by placing them on the open fire directly because they burn, but by heating rocks in the fire and dropping them into the water. Learned that one from a computer game called Echo. Who says video games aren't useful? Once the water is boiled, I can pour it into the remaining coconuts that I perforated, which will function as flasks. I'm going to spend the rest of the day boiling and stockpiling water. I'll try to keep the fire stoked overnight, 1, so I don't have to make it again, and 2, so it'll be easier for rescuers to see my camp at night. I considered exploring and collecting resources at night while it's cooler, but I realize that's a two-edged sword because, without a flashlight, I may not be able to see where I'm going and what obstacles may be in front of me, which could lead me to get injured. Furthermore, in the tropics, there's virtually no twilight period for me to search for things in. 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. That's why I'm writing now, before it gets dark. Day 2. I was exhausted by the time night fell, from all the work I've done so far, and especially from the heat. I probably slept for that whole 12 hours. As I drifted off, though, the sleeping mat reminded me of when Dad and I would camp out for Sukkot. Even through several layers of inflatable mattresses, we still felt the cold through the ground. I sure wish I had one of those now, the cold or the inflatable mattresses. The coconuts I collected the other day had loads of fat in them to keep me running, probably 1,500 kilocalories each, which would be enough to keep me going for about 11 days. However, I know I'm going to get absolutely sick of them in a hurry, and I need other nutrients besides raw fat and fiber. At this point, I see two options. The forest may have a few fruits and veggies I could eat, maybe even birds, but any plants I collect there are not going to grow back fast. It could keep me going while I wait for something else, though. The ocean, on the other hand, has a functionally unlimited supply of fish in it, at least as far as my survival is concerned, so that's what I'm going to aim for first. In a lot of documentaries I watch, I see native peoples or survival experts building fish traps. And it's a way to collect food over time without having to work very hard for it, and I consider doing the same thing. They're kind of like crab pots or hornet traps, with a narrowing entrance that they can't find their way back out of. However, given that it took me an hour yesterday just to weave a basket hat, I don't think I'd be able to make very many traps today, and that time might be better spent collecting and stockpiling easier food sources. Considering faster options, I've also got the fishing line and hooks, but I'm not going to waste my time sitting around and waiting for a bite like with a classic fishing line. So instead, I've opted to tie the lines together to create something I've heard of called a trot line. It's basically one long fishing line that hangs in the water, with shorter hooked lines hanging off of it called snoods, which I only remember because the name is funny. Any fish that takes the bait will get itself hooked and just hang there until I can come along to collect it. I can tie small pieces of rock near the hooks to hold them down in the water, like a sinker, and tie larger rocks to the ends of the trot line to hold the whole thing down, with empty coconuts or segments of bamboo in the middle to keep the trot line suspended in the water where I can see it easily. I could even weight the floats on one side and put a stick on the other so they stand up straight in the water like a flag, so I can easily see where they are. I found that the fishing line I had wasn't long enough, so I split and shaved a stalk of bamboo to make some cord to extend it. I went a little ways into the jungle to look for bait, and used my pocket knife to sharpen a stick to go digging for worms, like when I was a kid. Never really liked fishing itself, though. Too boring. I wasn't about to use the pocket knife for digging. That would dull it down, and that's also how I broke the one Dad gave me. I noticed while I was digging that the soil here seems to be mostly composed of hard clay, a lot like the lowland soil back home, but without all the rounded stones from glacial erosion. Here, any of the stones I do come across while digging are still jagged, and many are kind of foamy in texture, suggesting that the island was probably formed volcanically, and the soil is made from a volcanic ash called tuff, which has eroded from the rocks due to rainfall since the volcano's initial eruption, a lot like the soil geology of Easter Island. Now, why is this important? Because knowing about the island's geological history will give me a better idea of what useful mineral resources may be on it, and what geographical hazards to look out for, because there definitely doesn't seem to be anyone around to help me avoid them. For now, the clay by itself is a potentially very useful resource to me, so I took a basketful back to camp, in addition to the bugs. Now, as much as it pains me to do so, I have to crush the bugs and worms and mix them in with the clayish soil. This should effectively allow me to create a ball of low-tech power bait, which I can stretch further than straight worms impaled on a hook, while slowly diffusing their scent continuously into the water to attract fish for a long time. That way, I don't have to kill as many bugs, not that I'm going to enjoy killing the fish either. Then, to make sure the bait never falls off, I'll pack it into a little section of bamboo or reed that I can tie next to the hooks, where the fish will still smell it and try to bite. The fishing lines are ready, and I made 5 separate lines to hedge my bets. Even if each line only catches 2 fish over the course of a night, that's 10 fish at 100 to 200 kilocalories each. About enough to cover my daily caloric needs, with protein for sustained energy to boot. It's about noon now, and I'm shaving some more bamboo for cord. It's a little hard to focus, though, because I'm starting to get bad headaches from Coca-Cola withdrawal. When I'm done, I'll gather some extra pieces of bamboo and lash them together to form a simple pontoon raft, kind of like those I've seen used on Lake Titicaca in Peru, made from woven reeds, though the bamboo is going to make this one much more rigid. However, because bamboo is full of segmented hollow chambers, it should be virtually impossible for the raft to sink. I'd be more worried about the lashing coming undone when stressed, so I've got it in my head to tie some connections between longitudinal straps in a zigzag pattern, kind of like the strings on a drum, to help them maintain constant tension. Making this raft is actually a much better idea for me than simply wading out into the ocean with my trot lines, even though it's more work. This is not just because the tides and currents could carry me out to sea, but because in the tropics, the sand under my feet may hide cone snails, which possess an extremely toxic venom that I would not survive out here. Even stepping on a sea urchin would probably be a death sentence, even if I didn't get infected, because I would be unable to walk around to get food or construction materials. Once I'm done testing the raft, I'll come back and have some lunch. I took the handles off the ends of the life raft paddles and lashed them end to end so I could effectively use my raft like a kayak. It certainly turned out shaped like one. I'm rather tickled with the fact that I've arguably made a means of leaving the island already, after just 1.5 days, though I don't trust the kayak or myself to be able to cross half the Pacific Ocean. Having access to bamboo really is an early game changer, though I could probably have gotten away with less ideal materials like plain old sticks, wood, and grass ropes, but it would have taken longer to make. I took the trot lines out on my kayak to areas that seemed to have the highest fish concentrations, and were more or less within visual distance of my shelter. I can see some pretty vibrant looking coral reefs underneath me. While I was out and thinking about it, I decided to partially circle the island to see if there were any more signs of civilization. It didn't take me much longer than half an hour to go all the way around and back to my base, which tells me that this island is tiny, so it makes sense that I haven't seen anyone yet, and I'm lucky to have found it at all. That's not what I want to write about, though. About halfway around the island, past the mangrove swamp and up the beach from my camp, I found the remains of a man-made structure, which I immediately stopped to investigate. It appeared to have been some kind of World War II bunker. My guess is that the US Navy set it up as a radio relay station, because the island is far too small for a real runway for aircraft, and the seas nearby are too shallow for boats to come for resupply. From my limited knowledge of my flight path, I know that this island must have been pretty out of the way of the Pacific campaign, so it probably didn't see a lot of action, but it would have definitely been a bombing target. Unfortunately for me, that means they didn't have a lot to leave behind either. It looks like they took everything that wasn't nailed down home with them. There's still an old radio mast sticking up out of the jungle, and it looks like it was designed to be lowered on a rusty old hinge at a moment's notice to keep it hidden if the bunker came under attack. The bunker itself appears to be little more than a rusting corrugated steel tube dug into the hillside to keep it hidden and protected from bombs. The entrance has the remains of a sandbag wall in front of it, possibly meant to function as a machine gun nest, but now overgrown to the point that it's barely recognizable as more than a grass-covered hump in the soil. The door, while old and rusty, was locked and still too strong for me to break open with a stick, so I picked my way around the sides of the bunker and found a hatch or vent hidden just above it, half buried in the jungle vegetation, possibly for ventilation or as an emergency escape if cornered. I managed to wedge it open with a stick and look inside. I saw a single room where they probably kept their bunks, galley, and supplies, and closer to the door is where they probably kept the radio. Even if they'd left it behind, I probably wouldn't have the equipment to fix it. It's basically empty now, though. They didn't even leave a bunk behind. The best I could use it for is as an auxiliary shelter, but without a front door, I don't think it would be worth the effort. I did notice something odd before I left, though. The doors were rusty and old, but the padlock and chain holding them shut, while still rusty, were clearly not as old as the rest of the bunker, meaning someone has probably been here to secure it since the last World War. I tried to look closely for clues about how long ago this place was occupied, but unfortunately everything inside was too dark and too far away for me to see. I'm not sure why someone would come by relatively recently to lock up an empty room. Maybe it's a protected landmark or something. Whatever the case, I'm now cautiously hopeful that even if no one is still around right now, whoever locked that bunker may come back to check on it eventually, though with any luck at all, I'll be rescued before then. In the meantime, I'm going to have something for dinner, stoke the fire, and get more fresh water boiling for tomorrow. Day 3. It's not easy sleeping on the ground, but I was able to shape the sand under my mat last night to help give me the best spinal support I could get under the circumstances. After getting the water boiling again, I set out on the kayak to check my trot lines. I caught 22 fish last night, much better than I was expecting. I removed them easily from the hooks as they seemed too exhausted from fighting the lines all night to resist being captured. While I was collecting fish, though, I noticed a minor problem with the trot line system, namely that some of the fish were partially eaten, and a few of the hooks had strips of flesh on them, suggesting a few got off the hooks during the night. Given the haul, though, I don't consider this a big deal, and I figure I can use the half-eaten fish as the next round of bait. I returned to base and cleaned the fish, using my knife to carefully fillet them. This will cost me a few calories from wasted meat, but I can't afford to accidentally swallow a fish bone when I don't have access to medical attention. Besides, I can cook the bones and fish remains down anyway, the same way that I boil my water to make soup, though the prospect of fish broth doesn't sound very appetizing. And, to make sure I don't waste anything, I can mix the guts with clay to make the next round of power bait. As for cooking the fillets, I could build a grill using sticks to cook them over the fire, like I think Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest used for cooking salmon back in the day, but I have a better idea. I took a few moments to go looking for a nice flat stone, basalt if I'm not mistaken, and ground it down against another stone in the spots where it wasn't quite flat enough. I then washed it and placed it in the fire for a while until I knew it was hot, by dripping a little water on it until it sizzled. Then I squeezed some oil out of the coconut meat I'd collected and fried my fillets on the hot, flat stone, which made them taste a lot better. They needed salt though, so I poured a little seawater on them, which boiled away and left the salt behind for flavor. Still, it reminds me that I'm going to lose a lot of salt to sweat in this weather, in addition to water, another thing I learned from a computer game. So I'll set apart one of my coconut shells to get some seawater reducing. All I have to do is leave it in the sun and top it off every now and then. In the meantime, the fried fish should keep for the day, even in this horrible heat, but I'd rather not leave that to chance. I collected and washed down some broad leaves to wrap the fish in for protection from insects, leaving the wraps out in the sun to keep them too hot for bacteria to grow on. Upon taking a closer look, however, I realized that the leaves were from a banana plant, though the bananas themselves were very small and probably weren't ready to eat yet. Still, it's another source of food and useful materials. This gets me thinking now about collecting and stockpiling food. It's always good to have some in reserve in case of an emergency, like back home when we had a whole bunch of freeze-dried foods in storage for when a big storm or power out came through. But if I'm aiming to have a surplus of fish eventually, I'm going to need a way to preserve them. I want to avoid smoking them because I'm not partial to the taste or carcinogens, and I don't want to dry them directly in the sun because flies might come and plant their eggs or other diseases on them. I could brine them for preservation, which sucks the water out of their cells by osmosis, and by extension out of the cells of any bacteria that might try to grow on them. My only concern with this would be that it would cost me more water bodily later. I think the best way to do this will be by putting the cleaned fish in sealed containers with salt. They don't have to be in contact with the salt in order for it to desiccate them, because water will evaporate out of them into the air and be absorbed by the salt over time, though direct contact would help. I could individually wrap each fish in broad grass or leaves and then surround the wraps in salt to dry them, though keeping them in the hot sun would also probably help the evaporation process. To do this, though, I'm going to need a lot more salt. I could get more coconut shells and leave them to dry in the sun, but I feel like that would take longer. time, or a lot more heat from my fire, though it doesn't look like I'm in any kind of hurry. I find myself in the middle of a what now moment. If I keep my current routine, I've basically got all the food and water I'll need. And every survival book will tell you that the best thing to do when you're stranded is to wait for rescue, because you can't risk getting injured and it generally makes you easier to find. They'll probably find me in the next few days anyway. Still, if they don't, I need to start preparing for the long haul again, because I have no way of predicting when or if they'll find me. Just as importantly, though, I think doing so would help me keep my mind active and away from any thoughts of despair that might creep in and tempt me from trying anymore. I know it'll probably go there again eventually, and I have to do what I can to prevent that while I'm still feeling lucid enough to do so. That said, I feel like the most valuable resource that I need to conserve right now is time, because I'll probably be spending most of my days collecting and resetting my trot lines, collecting and boiling water, and collecting wood to keep the fire running. That latter factor is going to be an important one because sticks, trees, and driftwood are going to run out eventually, and sooner rather than later on such a tiny island. And I don't want to have to cut down trees if I can avoid it. There are two things I would really like to do at this point. One is to mold and fire some clay to make a water distiller. The other is to find a way to use solar power to heat this process rather than using wood. Aluminum foil would be ideal if I could find some, and if I had enough of it, but unless I find someone doing a cookout, that sounds a bit unlikely to find on a deserted island. A distiller will have to do for now, and if I design it properly, I might be able to use it for cooking, and even as a kiln for making other objects out of pottery, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just see if I can make a pot first. I took my sharpened stick and looked for a suitable place to begin digging for clay up in the jungle a little ways, and it wasn't hard to find a good spot. Just the fact that I've been collecting my water from a rivulet on the beach means that I'm already in a place where clay is likely to form natural deposits, where water moves slowly or not at all. And even if the clay wasn't very concentrated, I could wash the dirt to separate the sizes of the grains, leaving the sand at the top and the clay to sink to the bottom. Fortunately, the clay on this island doesn't require too much processing, and I can use the hole I dug the clay out of as a settling basin if need be. Once I figured I had enough, and picked or washed the rocks out of it, I then shaped the clay into long strands that I coiled and pressed together into pots, the way they used to make them before potting wheels were invented. As such, my pots look pretty wonky, but for now I'm just trying to get the hang of it before moving on to anything more complicated. Even if they're useful for nothing else, I could still use them as settling pots for getting more clay out of the sediment. I made a place for my first pot in the fire pit, and practically built a small bonfire around it in order to keep in as much of the fire's heat as possible, which would otherwise escape into its surroundings rather than cooking the pot. And it's hot enough around here as it is. Now I'm going to head back out to get more wood. I've spent the afternoon keeping the fire stoked and making more pots of various sizes and shapes while the one pot was firing. For now, all I can do is leave them to dry in the sun. I'm concerned now that the first pot might crack because I didn't give it time to dry. The evaporation of water from the sediment, or uneven expansion or contraction during cooking as a result, could cause this, and I'm not sure if the sediment can be recycled after it's cooked. Still, I can at least use these new pots as a backup, and they're looking much better than the first. I've made 5 pots in total so far, and it takes about an hour to make each one, as it is a fiddly process rolling and directing that coil. I've been poking and prodding impatiently at that pot being fired, because I don't know exactly when it's supposed to be done. It's not like I can stick a toothpick through it. But it did occur to me while I was making the other pots that I could make a few small lengths of clay to set in the fire with the first pot. Over the course of the day I can take one out, break it open, and see if it's done, and by extension the pot with it. So far it's still hard to tell. I kind of expected as time went on to notice my little clay rolls getting a little harder on the outside while still being a little crumbly and sandy on the inside, but to a lesser and lesser degree as time went on. This hasn't really happened, and it kind of makes sense. It doesn't cook like bread dough, after all, because the sediment inside is supposed to effectively melt together, making it solid. As a result, I should find it increasingly harder to snap in half. It's almost the end of the day, and the pot is still not finished. So before the sun goes down, I'll harvest a lot more wood and fire all my pots at once, overnight, using one or more bonfires. This is technically no more wood than I would have to use to fire them all anyway, and by setting a large bonfire at night, I should make myself much more visible to rescue, although my sleep will suffer. I'll prepare my water ration before going to bed, and stoke the fires as I wake up in the night. Day 4. By the time I woke up this morning, my headache was gone and the pots were done and cool enough to handle. The first one cracked quite badly, which I suppose I was expecting, but the others seemed to come out intact. I was quite pleased with myself until I filled one with salt water to test how waterproof they were. I was hoping to collect salt over the course of the day when I headed out to attend to my trout lines, but when I got back, though, I found that the salt water leaked out through the porous clay. I guess it's a good thing I didn't use them to hold my fresh water yet, but this is really annoying after all the work I went through to make them yesterday. I think I know what my mistake was, though. I noticed a spot on the bottom of the pot where a droplet of water beaded up instead of soaking in. This is where I initially placed it in the fire pit, and it got covered with ash, creating a sort of thin, smooth skin that I believe is called an ash glaze. This reminded me of something I heard about called a salt glaze, which has been used in the past to waterproof ceramic pots. With that little memory unlocked, I'm going to wash down the pots, some with salt water and some with ash water to hedge my bets, and begrudgingly restart the bonfires and collect more wood, which is getting harder to find near the beach. Maybe I could try making an axe, but I don't want to chop down any trees. Not just because they're living things and take forever to grow back, but because it would take too much time to subsequently chop them into bite-sized chunks for the fire. Plus, they would still be green and thus less conducive to burning. That means I need to simply expand my search area, which in turn means I need to figure out how to get as much wood as I can in as few trips as possible to conserve my time and energy. I spent an hour or so constructing a sort of sled or dolly out of bamboo and sticks, which I can drag behind me and carry a large load of wood. Then I set off into the forest, following the rivulet so I wouldn't lose my way, and collected any dry wood I saw. While I was in the forest, I found many interesting and useful plants. I was particularly excited to find several breadfruit trees, which I remembered from reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and recognized by their spiky, maple-like leaves and their round, pale green fruit with a cobbled, spiky textured skin. I collected several samples of the fruit that had already fallen, and if I remember correctly, according to Vern's research, they are still quite edible and tasty even when they've been given some time to ferment, breaking down into a starchy paste. Each fruit is about 1 to 2 kilograms in weight, and since they're pretty much all starch, they probably have about 1 kilocal per gram, meaning a single fruit has almost enough fuel in it to get me through an entire day. I always thought these were amazing plants, and unfortunate that they're restricted to the tropics and aren't more well known, as they could be used to feed a lot of people pretty cheaply. I guess potatoes are cheaper somehow. Whatever the case, it's a welcome supplement to my diet, as the fish was going to get pretty old pretty quickly. I also found a fig tree, or another member of the ficus family, which I recognized by its dark green ovular leaves and smooth curving trunk that climbs up the trunks of other trees, like the strangler fig. I took a few of the fresher looking fruit from the ground for myself, though I've never really been a big fan of figs. They remind me of the inside of a small intestine. These fruiting trees are relatively easy to find because there's a lot of animal life hanging around them, particularly a diverse number of tropical birds in and around the trees consuming the ripe fruit, and they tend to be quite noisy. Somewhat to my surprise, though, I found wild chickens wandering the understory as well, picking at the fruit that had fallen to the ground. Their presence here suggests to me that someone did try to colonize this island at some point, but abandoned the attempt, possibly because it was too small or too remote, and left some of their chickens behind. While their ancestors were domesticated, and they are therefore not naturally afraid of humans, they are still too wary to let me get within melee range. Not that I really want to catch or hurt them at this time. However, I kept one eye on the ground after this, in addition to one eye on the trees, and found a few eggs that I could take back to camp with me. I checked them by holding them up to the sun, and if they were cloudy, that told me they were either bad or had a chick growing inside them. If clear, they were okay to eat. While eggs only have 70 or 80 kilocalories, they have a lot of protein, again meaning I don't have to be as dependent on fishing for it. I returned to base with booty in tow, and stoked the fires before spending a little time cooking up the breadfruit and boiling the eggs, since I have no better way to cook or preserve them at this time. I was excited to try the breadfruit, as I've only ever heard about it up till now, and found I could roast it on the fire in its own skin, before splitting it open like a baked potato. It does indeed have a slightly bready smell, and a sweet starchy flavor. I can definitely eat these for a while. I now find myself in the middle of another what now moment. I'm kind of sick of collecting wood and babying the fires needed to cook my pots, and I don't really need fired clay to make a working kiln. So while the rest of my food cooks, I'll take some time to think and plan out how I want this kiln to work. To make it as energy efficient as possible, I have in mind to model it off of a calorimeter. It was a simple instrument I was first introduced to in my college chemistry class, consisting of two insulated styrofoam cups. One covered an object being burnt to keep in as much of the resulting heat as possible, and the other, just above it, was filled with a known amount of water, which ended up absorbing virtually all of the heat. By measuring the temperature of the water, you could measure how many calories of heat energy were released by burning something. In my case, I will be measuring the energy of burnt wood, and I want all of that energy going into cooking. So, to recreate this process on a larger scale, I'll need to start by putting the fire in the bottom of the kiln, in an insulated chamber large enough to fire a pot while I'm cooking. The tricky part about calorimeters, though, is that you need to let the hot gases produced by the reaction escape, but you want them to transfer all of their heat to the cup of water as it goes. So to make the most of the heat being produced, I have the idea to put the clay pot in the chamber above the fire with a sort of spiraling chimney groove wrapping around it, so the hot gases from the burning wood have to touch the pot for as long as possible, until they're both the same temperature. This kiln design should help me minimize the amount of wood I need to collect, since I can't eliminate that factor just yet. I can also make the pot removable in case I need to use the kiln for larger projects, or in case it cracks. That way, I don't have to replace the entire kiln. Inside this pot, I can cook food or pour a large volume of salt water from the ocean for distillation, which should save me a lot of time boiling water, as I can just fill the pot with seawater in the morning and let it cook all day while I'm out doing other things. Then, at the end of the day, I'll be left with a whole bunch of salt in which to cook and preserve the fish I've caught and cleaned. Finally, I should consider making it portable, in case I need to relocate my camp again. With that, I think I've got a plan. After I was done with lunch, I started digging up clay to hold the kiln together, using water from the stream to separate the soil grains. While I let that percolate, I went looking for some rocks to assemble the kiln with, specifically the foamy volcanic pumice stones I've seen around the island, as the air pockets inside them will help prevent heat loss via conduction. Once the clay was ready, I made a flat platform reinforced with bamboo to act as a stable and portable foundation if I need to move the kiln with my dolly later, and built a ring of pumice stones on top of it, grouting them together with clay and stacking the rings until the kiln was the height I wanted. Partway up the ring, I laid down some pieces of bamboo and covered them thickly with clay to make a grate over the fire that I can rest my pots on. I kept checking as I went to make sure the diameter stayed the right size to fit some of my better pots. Once the superstructure was done, I coated it inside and out with clay, using lengths of rolled clay to create the spiral smokestack I wanted, and a couple of pieces of bamboo to shape the grooves more uniformly. Finally, I used what wood I had left to light a small fire inside the kiln to help it dry out faster. Hopefully not so hot that it will crack though. It's nearing the end of the day and I've still got some time on my hands, so I'll get some more clay and make the distillation hat for the top of the pots. For the most part, what I'm planning on making is like a regular pot, but I'll use a piece of bamboo to shape a spout that passes up through the middle and out the side. The pot will hold cold water while the distilled water comes out the spout. I'll leave the bamboo in the tubes to hold them rigid while the clay fires, since I can remove them or burn them out later. This may be tricky to build though, and if it doesn't work, I can make a different one that uses a coil of clay going around the wall of the pot, using a piece of bamboo to form the tube in short sections as I go, since I have started to get good at that from practicing on the kiln. This design should achieve a much higher efficiency of distillation, and may even be able to perform fractional distillation as well, but that might be getting ahead of myself. Finally, if that design doesn't work either, I can always forego the pot and just make it a solid hat with a spout. Like I said, I have time and plenty of clay, so I'll make all three and go with whatever works best. Hedge my bets. Not like I had anything else going on. I finished my lids and set them next to the fire to dry for the night, before heading back to the forest to look for a little more wood before the sun went down. It's probably worth mentioning that I've seen several interesting species of insects and arachnids under the bits of wood and logs that I've been picking up. I even saw a giant coconut crab. Fortunately, none of the arthropods I've seen appear to be of deadly varieties. There are also frogs, geckos, lizards, and even a few sea snakes, mostly on rocks around the beach, but sometimes in the forest. These snakes are venomous, but I heard that they're actually so docile that children in the Pacific Islands used to play with them before the scientists came along and told their parents they were venomous. Even if you harassed one, it would probably be hard for them to give you a deadly bite, because their fangs are at the back of their mouths rather than the front, like in vipers and cobras. I'm still going to keep a respectful distance from them, though. Anyway, when I got back to camp with the wood, the pots I made yesterday were finished glazing, so I took them out of the fire and put the new distillation lids in their places. Now I'm going to try to get some sleep, and hope a sea snake doesn't try to snuggle up to me in the night. Day 5. The pots were cool by the time I got up this morning, so I filled a few with seawater again, and they don't appear to be leaking like before. Now I can use them to start stockpiling fresh water, so I don't have to spend every day boiling it or dropping hot, ashy rocks into it, or in case I have some kind of emergency. Each pot has a volume of about 2 liters, enough to hold 1 day's ration of water. So I filled 3 of them with clean water. The rest I'll leave to dry salt water in the sun or next to the fires so the heat is not wasted. It occurred to me last night, though, that I may not have to boil my water at all. I could set it out in direct sunlight, and while this would cause some evaporation, the UV rays would kill most of the germs over a period of about 6 hours. I can use my clear plastic bottles so the water can't get recontaminated, but at the same time, I figure if they're out in the sun, any airborne germs trying to get in, I would either breathe in anyway, or would have to deal with the same sunlight killing the germs already in the water. This means I can save my wood for other things, and revert to boiling or distilling water when the weather's bad. Either way, not having to baby my water to purify it in the coconut shells will save me quite a bit of time each day. Speaking of distillation, the kiln and distiller lids are done cooking now, and I decided to give the lids a quick test to see if they leaked. The simple solid lid didn't seem to have any problems, but the one with the right angle had a pretty bad crack in it. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and I can modify the broken distiller lid into a regular pot. I decided to glaze these lids as well, just for good measure, so after rinsing them in the sea, I put them back in the fires for the rest of the day. Most of them I put in the new kiln for a test run. This won't make it cook any faster, but does mean I can cook several things in it at once for maybe half the firewood I was using. Just for good measure though, I put a stone over the top of the kiln to keep more heat in. I realize now, however, that the only major downside to this system is that because it burns the fuel more completely, there's less smoke to be seen by rescue during the day, and the enclosed construction keeps the fire from being seen at night, so I'll still have to keep at least one bonfire burning. I still feel like I'm going to need more pots though, so I'll spend some time this morning digging out more clay, making more pots, some lids for them, and a proper lid and chimney for the kiln. While I was making the other pots, I made a flat clay slab with an indentation in the middle that I can use as a more consistent cooking skillet, with a piece of bamboo sticking out the side so I can use it as a handle. After a couple hours' work, I set everything out in the sun to dry, and I'm having lunch now. The salt water in the kiln pot has evaporated several times over already, and I keep refilling and concentrating the salt for later use. It kind of reminds me of winters back home. We had a wood stove and the air in the house got dry, which irritated Mom's upper airway, so we'd keep a pot of water on the stove to keep the air humid, and every now and then, when the water got low, we'd top it off and I'd notice how the dissolved minerals in our tap water would build up over several days. After lunch, I went looking for more firewood, this time moseying toward the mangrove side of the island. There wasn't a lot of dry wood here, which is mostly to be expected because it's a muddy swamp. However, while I was there, I did find a broad-leaved plant with a large tuber underground, which I suspect to be taro. I think I remember Mike Rowe tending to some of these in an episode of Dirty Jobs, and they could function as a long-term food supply for me. So after checking to make sure there were more of them growing in the area, I took a small chunk of the root back with me, leaving the rest to grow back like a potato. I just wanted to cook it to confirm that it was edible, and in fact it has a sweet, starchy, almost nutty flavor. I'm in another what now moment. It does seem a bit weird that no one has come to rescue me yet. It's been almost a week. The first day, they should have known the plane was missing when it didn't show up on schedule. More likely the second it crashed and its radio stopped transmitting. And even if they overlooked it for a day, someone definitely should have started asking questions about where I was by now, and scrambled some planes to search along my flight path. I suppose they could still be searching, which is why I need to keep the fires burning. I decided to throw a little duff on the fires to make them smoke more. Since I didn't find much down by the mangroves, I should probably look for some more firewood. And since I'm kind of tired of looking for it so often, I think I'll spend most of the rest of the day collecting and stockpiling it. One problem I'm running into is that some of the good, dry logs I'm finding in the forest are too big for me to carry back or feed into the fires. Since I obviously couldn't use my pocket knife, I decided I would need to make an axe. The first thing I did was go looking for some good, strong rocks with a fine grain. I'm in luck as far as stone tools are concerned, because the island is volcanic, and volcanic rocks are pretty hard, as rocks go, such as basalt. However, the best thing I found for making cutting tools was volcanic glass, which is very sharp, though I wasn't particularly good at flint knapping it. Most of them just shattered into flakes, which may only be marginally useful as cutting blades. And I was scared to hit the rock too hard and cut my hands. So instead, I bashed a couple of basalt rocks together until I got a nice approximate wedge, and then rubbed the wedge against another rock, keeping them wet with water until I got a good, relatively sharp axe head. I then affixed it to a sturdy branch with some bamboo cord, and gave the logs some tentative whacks. When I saw the axe wasn't coming apart, I started swinging harder. It took a while, but I eventually got the logs chopped into pieces that were easier to transport. This should take a couple of hours and save me some time searching for fallen sticks for a while. The whole process reminded me of chopping wood with Dad back home, or collecting and cutting up logs that would occasionally fall across the roads after a storm. We used chainsaws for that, and while I was always kind of afraid of them, one sure would have come in handy today. It's the end of the day, and the glaze on my distiller lid should be done cooking, and the new pots, lids, and skillet should be done drying. So I swapped them out and stoked the fire for the night. Just before I did, however, it occurred to me that I could have saved myself a whole day of time by firing and deglazing the pots at the same fire, rather than firing pots for a whole night and glazing for a whole day. Makes me feel like I wasted my time a bit, but you don't know these things until you try. Day 6. I checked my pots in the morning and they mostly turned out alright. There are a few cracks and bubbles in the glaze which might irritate an artist, but it's no big deal to me. I chalk it up to the pots not being perfectly dry when I started firing them. I've been trying to eat the breadfruit before it goes bad, so I've been saving the fish. I have enough salt now to start preserving the excess, and I'm only going to get more salt now that I have the distiller hats for the kiln finished. It's a good thing, too, because the weather turned bad today. I just managed to bring in my haul of fish before it started raining, and I had to put out my bonfires, reducing my chances of being seen. At least the kiln was largely unaffected by the rain, thanks to its enclosed design. I scrambled to hide as much wood as I could under my raft shelter, so it wouldn't get too wet to use. My freshwater pots may not be able to disinfect the water stored in them now, but I left them out anyway so they could catch rainwater, which should already be functionally distilled. Even if the rainwater turns out to be no good, I'm still making water from the distiller, so even with the bad weather, I'm ahead of the game. I can even still use my new skillet to fry some fish in the kiln, and the rain helped to wash away the blood and guts while I cleaned them. However, most of them I'm going to wrap in leaves and store in a pot with the salt I've collected. The only downside to the rain right now, besides being cold and wet, is that I can only cook one pot at a time in the kiln. Probably for the best at this point. The rain is actually quite a welcome respite for me from the relentless sun, though the wind is not. But I have to work hard sometimes to keep the raft shelter from blowing away. Grab a few rocks to hold it down. There is, unfortunately, not a lot I can do in this weather but hunker down, as it's too dangerous for me to go exploring in the woods, lest a tree or branch fall and injure me, or to go out on the water in my kayak lest I be capsized or driven out to sea. There's something cozy about the hunkering, though, miserable as I am otherwise. It again reminds me of the big storms we'd have back home in the fall or early spring, which would knock out the power. I always enjoyed them, feeling insulated and safe indoors. And while I'm trying to hold on to that feeling, I feel much less safe hiding under the rubber life raft. The storm let up a little bit this afternoon, but it's already done its damage, as the raft has been punctured by the rocks I used to weigh it down, deflating it. While the weather wasn't terrible, I headed into the forest to chop down some bamboo, which my axe made light work of. I then cut a bit of cord and used the bamboo to form a frame that I could have fixed the deflated raft to, like a tent. I was able to use one of the more robust fish hooks, like a needle, to pierce the raft and tie it to the support rods, the ends of which I either drove into the sand or tied to rocks to hold them down if the wind picks up again. I think I may even use my knife to cut open the pontoons of the raft and fill them with sand to weigh the whole thing down. Admittedly, this is much cozier than the original shelter, so I'm kind of pleased with it. I've removed my clothes and protective gear to let them dry as much as they can under the tent. Unfortunately, I can't bring the kiln inside the tent to warm them or dry them out, otherwise it would melt the raft. I've gotten myself into another what now moment, because there's not a lot I can do stuck inside a tent while it's raining. I can't dry more pots in this weather. I figured I'd better find something useful to do that takes a very long time. So before the storm starts to pick up again, I'll gather some more bamboo, sticks, and broad grasses, and sit down for the evening to begin constructing a new backpack, as my old one was falling apart even before I got on the plane. This should make it easier for me to collect and carry food, tools, and materials around with me. I began making my backpack by cutting some bamboo cords for the straps and tying everything together. I figured I would probably need a lot of it, so I made a stockpile, I then made the bottom of the basket with long vertical support struts and affixed them to a ring at the end to define the shape of the basket, which is mostly cylindrical. I found the long, thin ends of the bamboo shoots, which I've thus far been unable to use for cord, ideal for this function, and while I was picking at them, I remembered that the young shoots of bamboo plants can be steamed and eaten as a vegetable, which could be an important source of minerals for me. After that, it was just a matter of weaving in more sticks and broad grass to make the basket strong and water repellent respectively. I integrated the straps of bamboo cord as I went, which I occasionally had to weave together to keep them from coming apart like so many tiny strands of cooked spaghetti. I made sure that the straps reached over the front and top of the backpack to support it and hold it against my back, rather than weaving them into the back of the backpack like my old modern manufactured one, where stress would eventually pull everything apart. It will effectively be hanging off of me and not the straps. I even carved some slots into a few pieces of bamboo to make slides that allow me to tighten the straps like a real backpack. And finally, I topped the thing with a banana leaf to cover the opening and keep the rain out of it, secured with a little stick on a cord for a button. Again, I'm quite pleased with this project. I stored most of my tools in it and even made a little strap on the side to hold my axe where it will be handy. I can at least go to bed pleased that I got something important done today, in spite of the weather. Day 7. I'd resolved to take my 7th day off as a Sabbath, but I find I'm kind of being forced to do that anyway because of the weather. I can't even go out to retrieve my trot lines, so that's a bummer. I'm getting plenty of water from the rain though, even though I sometimes have to strain particles out of it with my shirt fabric. Otherwise, I have plenty of distilled water from the kiln. Can't get wood either, so it's a good thing I stockpiled it when I did. I can't just sit around and do nothing for an entire day, especially when I'm supposed to be surviving. So I figure I should dedicate Saturdays to exploration, research, and art, the latter for the purposes of helping me stay sane. Since I can't explore or collect natural resources to study right now, I'll have to do something to help me maintain my sanity, and that's probably going to mean making a larger journal, as this notebook is starting to fill up fast. Perhaps I can start by tearing some of the bark off the wood I've collected to use as a sort of paper. This is not unheard of. I think the Polynesians traditionally used bark to make a paper-like cloth for clothing. In my case, I can probably smash it a little between some rocks to make it flat, and to open up the fibers a bit so it will hold a mark. I can then leave it in front of the kiln to dry out for a bit. Alternatively, I could brave the weather to look for broad leaves to write on, but either way, I can use a bit of charcoal from the fire as a pencil to write, as I have started to run out of refills for my mechanical pencils, and the ink ran out of all my pens when my backpack got dipped in the drink. I should be able to compress the charcoal by hammering it into an open segment of bamboo to make a solid plug, and then sharpen it to a point before tying it carefully onto the end of a stick, so I can write very small and not waste paper. This should keep me busy for a couple of hours, and I'll make sure I have paper to set aside for subsequent days just in case. On that note, I really would have expected rescue by now. I thought about braving the weather and my impatience to make some kind of sign on the beach, but I remembered that no one is going to be flying around looking for me in this weather anyway, let alone see it, so I might as well wait till the storm ends, assuming it isn't already too late for that. With nothing better to do, I spent the afternoon using the materials I had left over for making the backpack to repair some of my gear. This let me see where some parts wore down faster than others, in particular the bow drill string. I also took some time to carve new fish hooks from the fish bones I've been accumulating, as one of my metal hooks disappeared the other day, probably from a big fish ripping it off the line. If that happens on a regular basis, I'll need some backups ready. The storm let up a bit while I was performing repairs, enough for me to get soaked but not drenched or blown away. I'm still too chicken to take the kayak out, but I took the opportunity to collect some brush and rocks to build a big SOS marker on the beach. That took a couple of hours in the rain, so I'm going to try to dry out and take a nap now. By the time I was done with my nap, the rain had finally passed, and I could get out and assess the damage. The wind knocked a whole bunch of stuff around, so there was a lot of branches and detritus on the beach. I decided to take advantage of the good weather while it lasted to go check on my trot lines, and unfortunately, any fish that were on them got off or were eaten by other fish, so I didn't catch anything today. Still, I took the opportunity to replace the hooks and bait. When I got back to the shore, I collected some of the wood that fell in the storm, leaving it on the beach to reinforce my SOS and to dry out in the sun tomorrow. Finally, I decided to head into the forest to collect whatever fruits were knocked out of the trees during the storm, before they have a chance to go bad. Mostly breadfruit, bananas, and figs. The backpack did a good job of helping me carry all that fruit, and I think it's worth noting that the bananas here are the real deal. Not those seedless giant freaks we normally get at the grocery store, but tiny and full of little round seeds, almost like a kiwi. While I was at the breadfruit tree, though, I took a moment to note the nick I put in it the other day to help me keep track of where I'd been in the forest. It is healed over with a white elastic scab, which tells me something I didn't know before. Breadfruit trees apparently produce latex, just like a rubber tree, and by scraping the scab away, I found more of the white juice started to flow. Saw the same thing when I checked the fig tree, too. This is at least one great thing to have happened today because rubber is an extremely useful material, and I'll have to start thinking of methods to harvest it. After that discovery, I refilled my storage pots with fresh water and watched the sunset, mostly thinking and talking to myself. Blooper reel. Okay, learning how to cut and paste with Audacity and such like that. I wonder if I can interrupt John Jacob Jingle Irishman myself. I was on a flight from Seattle to Taipei to visit the Taiwan semiconductor. Bleh. They're kind of like crab pots or hornet traps with narrowing entrances that they can't find their way back out of. However, given that it took me nearly an hour yesterday just to weave a basket hat, I don't think I'd be able to make very many traps today, and that time might be better spent collecting and stockpiling easier food sources. Considering faster options, I've also got the fishing line and hooks, but I'm not going to waste my time sitting around and waiting for a bite, like with a classic fishing line. So instead, I've opted to tie the lines together to create something I've heard of called a trot line. It's basically, oh for goodness sake, bamboo or reed that I can tie next to the hooks. There. I found that the fishing line I had wasn't long enough, so I split and bleh. And even if the clay wasn't very concentrated, I could wash the dirt to separate the sizes of the grains, leaving the sand at the top of the clay to sink to the bottom. That should be leaving the sand at the top of the clay to sink to the bottom. No, that's not right either. Leaving the sand at the top and the clay to sink to the bottom, since I have no better way to cook or preserve them at this time. This kiln design should help me minimize the amount of wood I need to collect. Finally, I should consider making it portable. Finally, if that design doesn't work either, and while I was always kind of afraid of them, one sure would have come in handy today. I have enough salt now to start preserving the excess, and I'm not only going to... I feel much less safe hiding under the rubber life raft. While the weather wasn't terrible, alternatively, I could braid I could brave the weather. By the time I was done with my nap, the rain had finally passed, and I could get out and assess the damage. And unfortunately, any fish that were on them got off. La 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 la. La 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 la. Rum till I float. Hey there, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for listening. I'm planning on making a new video/audio chapter every week for the foreseeable future, concurrent with my stay on the island, stuffing it in one of the millions of plastic bottles that wash up on the beach here and throwing it out to sea. So, if you like this and want to listen to the next one as soon as it drops, hopefully on time, you can press the bell button under this video to get notified as soon as I yeet it. Now, I'm not planning on monetizing this. I don't have a Patreon or anything. You can even turn on ad block if you want. But it would still help me out if you decide to press the like and subscribe buttons, because it tells YouTube algorithm, the great and powerful, to pay attention to this part of the ocean and hopefully send someone to get me out of here. I wouldn't count on it though, so it would help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone you know who you think would be into this sort of thing. Ideally someone with a boat. Also, if you'd like to chat about your own stories and perspectives on the episode, feel free to stuff a comment into a bottle and throw it into the comments section down below. I'd love to hear them. It's kinda lonely out here. And it also tells the algorithm to look in my direction and maybe notice my smoke signals. I welcome suggestions or corrections, especially any pertaining to running a YouTube channel since I'm new to this sort of thing. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.